Welcome to the Week 11 in the News presentation from Ashley, Jen, and Ansalito. This week's discussion is on global labor mobility and the impact of that on leadership. Traditionally, when you think of global labor mobility, you may think of the large numbers of highly skilled people who leave an emerging country to move to a more affluent one for a better way of life. And while there are still many foreign-born leaders working as expatriates, there is a growing trend of those individuals who come to affluent cultures like the United States, going back to their home countries to establish businesses using the skills and relationships they have gained from traveling. This is not only to the benefit of the individual, but to the developing country as well. Additionally, the role of offshoring is changing. What was once a term used for outsourcing IT or business processes to a foreign country has now grown to include more high-skilled jobs in the areas of product design and science and engineering. The article we chose to review is from The Diplomat and highlights the ways in which India can defend the country's economic interests by changing its approach to diplomacy. Offshoring and open immigration policies will be essential for India if all the country's workforce is to be productive. Having the largest population of young people in the world is both a resource and a challenge. India must find ways to harness the creative energy and ensure their productivity if the country is to remain viable. Countries used to control the costs of goods used to be imported by placing tariffs on those goods, but increasingly, countries like India are finding tariffs to have less impact than environment, social, and other mandates levied by the United States and Europe. India also struggles to compete with China's more ambitious infrastructure plans, and in order to remain competitive, India may need to implement some of its own. If India is to remain competitive, they will need to focus on 5 main goals. The first is in relation to the high demands on exports. India must ensure the trade negotiations limit these additional costs. India must continue to create and support legislation that encourages citizens to work for multinational companies and should work directly with companies in the West to ensure India's education system is meeting the needs of employers around the world. As China builds a high-quality infrastructure with One Belt, One Road and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, India must build their own infrastructure to remain competitive. And as companies and countries become more concerned about the safety of data being transferred internationally, India must lead these efforts to data security. Finally, while India is building a much-needed resource for other countries, it is essential that India encourage constant improvement in their education system. The article shows a perfect balance of circumstances that we, as future leaders, will come across. Not that critical and challenging, but close enough. It is important for us because it puts issues into perspective, meaning that there will be internal and external issues that will arise in our workplace. The 3 key findings are systems thinking, global challenges, and ambiguity of leadership. Systems thinking comes into play with India, for it not only has to solve its internal issues, it must also figure out how to be part of this global economy. Global challenges, one can also call it international laws or international policies that always change in a blink of an eye. When it comes to trade or labor mobility, it is important to understand the environment that you are trying to do business in. Finally, the ambiguity of leadership. As prepared, we as future leaders get that nothing is ever going to go the way we want it to go, thus making things very challenging. If organizations and leaders fail to fully understand and become more aware of job mobility of workers, there can be major repercussions. Michael A. Clemens wrote a paper in the Journal of Economic Perspectives that is discussed in an article in Forbes magazine stating the importance of free movement of people. Clemens notes that removing barriers to immigration, hence encouraging labor mobility, has the potential to boost GDP and economic climates worldwide. The U.S. would have an increase in high and low skilled labor if the immigration policy was not so tight. This ultimately would lead to more of a demand for goods and services and higher employment because of the expansion of the market. A report on trade discussed in the U.S. News article states there is a great degree of regional variation in the risk of job losses due to offshoring and automation. There are clear clusters of high risk in the industrialized Midwest and in several urban places across the country. The report says industrial structure, educational attainment, and the degree of rurality in all affect the potential employment risk of increased automation and trade-related job losses. For the U.S. to not encourage job mobility is to risk losing jobs to offshoring, which would displace millions of domestic workers. Risks of job automation and offshoring exist and can be influenced by labor markets, income, and education levels of workers. If the U.S. does not continue to use talent from other countries to fill positions, especially in STEM fields, there will not be enough interest and expertise. Therefore, STEM companies and leaders must not only learn about managing employees from the U.S. and different cultures, but also learn to manage employees from various countries. Jobs including computer programmers, film editors, and statisticians are some of the most at-risk jobs for offshoring, and those at risk of automation are insurance underwriters and telemarketers. To better understand the ever-evolving global talent management and all its complexities, Khilji and co-authors created a conceptual framework of GTM shared in the Human Resources Management Review. This is an attempt to expand the breadth of GTM, stating that using multiple forms of knowledge and methods is critical to the advancement of global talent management. This newly developed framework consists of environment, processes, and outcomes and offers a more comprehensive understanding of the problems facing GTM practitioners and researchers, as well as provides opportunities for developing well-informed, integrative organizational strategies and public policies. In order to avoid implications of the lack of engagement in job movement mentioned, there are many suggestions worth mentioning. The first recommendation for organization leaders is to increase one's knowledge and familiarity with various forms of technology. As workers for any one company do not tend to be in one locale, it is important to move beyond conference calls for every meeting and interaction. Video conferencing, document sharing, and cloud-based services are popular and often more effective. Khilji states, a great mobility of talent stimulates international transmission of ideas, produces knowledge flows, enhances learning, and improves efficiency of the innovation process. Another recommendation for teams is to engage in team building across cultures and continents. As individuals gain understanding and become acquainted with cultures outside of their own, they are introduced to new ideas and practices that ultimately lead to more innovative work. The practice of team building across cultures leads to the next recommendation to participate in diverse experiences. Organizations with workers spread across the globe should find value in allowing employees to travel and visit colleagues in other countries. This will give employees opportunities for diverse experiences, gaining more knowledge, and less likely to recreate something that's already been learned. Lastly, there are constant changes to governments around the world which greatly affect economies, trade, organizations, and leadership. Therefore, it is necessary to stay in tune with the different happenings around the globe by immersing oneself and staff in international news. Job markets and mobility can only fully be understood when studied from all contexts. An American company owner cannot and should not review only U.S. news and reports. There must be regard for ongoing events across the globe as they too affect the U.S. economy, trade, and labor market. Much is to be learned from expanding one's intake of news sources. The questions we have for you after this presentation are: what other recommendations do you have for leaders who are working across continents? And how do you think changing immigration policies around the world will affect global labor mobility? Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the discussion board.